billionaire discovers a baby abandoned at his door. Months later, he discovers the truth. The cry of a baby echoed through the empty mansion, tearing through the silence like thunder on a clear night. Henry Smith, the lonely billionaire, froze in the middle of his luxurious office, the whiskey glass slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble floor. Impossible. He must be hearing things. He had to be. The cry sounded again, louder this time, more desperate. Too real to be imagination. Henry rushed to the window, his eyes scanning the dark garden outside. The rain lashed the property, turning the meticulously maintained lawn into a muddy swamp. And there, under the dim glow of the porch light, was something that shouldn't be there. A basket. His heart raced. His mind screamed to ignore it, to call security, to do anything but what he was about to do. But his feet were already moving, racing down the stairs across the entrance hall. He opened the door and the storm engulfed him, soaking his $1,000 Italian suit in seconds. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except reaching that basket. Henry knelt in the mud, his trembling hands pulling back the soaked blanket. And there, looking back at him with scared, tear-filled eyes, was a baby. For a moment, time stopped. The world shrank to just him and this little life in his hands. And in that instant, Henry Smith, the man who had everything and nothing at the same time, made a choice that would change his life forever. He picked up the baby and held it against his chest, shielding it from the rain with his own body. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I'm here now. You're safe." As he carried the baby inside the mansion, leaving a trail of water and mud across the immaculate floor, Henry had no idea of the whirlwind about to unfold in his perfectly ordered life. He only knew one thing. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Back in the warmth of the mansion, Henry looked around, disoriented. The luxury surrounding him now seemed cold and useless. What did he know about taking care of a baby? His eyes landed on a framed photograph above the fireplace. Two young men smiling, full of hope. Henry and Robert, best friends, almost brothers. The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. Robert, the friend he had abandoned when he needed him most. The friend who had taken his own life just a few months ago. "Henry, please, I need help." Robert's voice echoed in his mind, laden with despair. "I'm sinking. I don't know what to do anymore." But Henry was too busy with a billion-dollar merger, his eyes fixed on spreadsheets on his laptop. "Robert, you know I'm in the middle of something important. I can't drop everything now. I'm sure you'll figure it out." "Figure it out." "Henry, you're not understanding. Look, I have to go. I have a video conference in 5 minutes. We'll talk later, okay?" The silence that followed was deafening. Henry never heard Robert's voice again. Now, with a baby in his arms, Henry felt the weight of his choices like never before. How could he have been so blind? How could he have traded friendship, love, for numbers in a bank account? The baby stirred in his arms, letting out a small whimper. Henry looked at that innocent face and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Compassion. And with it came a resolution. "Well, I won't make the same mistake twice," he murmured, both to the baby and to Robert's memory. "This time, I'll do the right thing." With trembling hands, Henry picked up his phone. It was time to ask for help. The baby's cries echoed through the mansion's corridors, breaking the silence that had reigned there for so long. Henry, still drenched from the rain, paced the living room, holding the small bundle in his awkward arms. "Shh, shh," he tried to soothe the child, his voice hoarse from lack of use. "It's okay, little one, it's okay." But was it really? Henry looked around at the expensive furniture and valuable artwork. Nothing there was suitable for a baby. Nothing there was suitable for life, really. And him, a man who could barely take care of himself, how could he take care of a child? The baby continued to cry, and Henry felt panic rising in his chest. What should he do? Call the police? Social services? Hand the child over and return to his life of solitude and regrets? Then his eyes landed again on the photograph of Robert, the friend he had failed to help. The friend he had abandoned when he needed him most. And now, the universe was presenting him with another soul in need. Could this be his chance for redemption? With trembling hands, Henry picked up his phone and made the only call that seemed to make sense at that moment. "Hello, Dr. Matthews? Sorry to call so late, but it's an emergency. I need you to come to the mansion immediately. Alice, could you bring baby supplies?" While he waited, Henry tried to calm both the baby and himself. He examined the basket, looking for some clue, some note, anything that could explain why this child had been left at his door. But there was nothing but the worn blanket and a small teddy bear. Matthews arrived in record time, carrying a medical bag and bags full of diapers, formula, and other baby essentials. "Henry," the doctor said, entering the room, "what's going on?" "You look." His words died when he saw the baby in Henry's arms. His eyes widened in shock and confusion. I found him at the door," Henry explained, his voice trembling. "Someone left him there, in the rain." "Doctor." Matthews quickly went into professional mode, carefully examining the baby. "It's a boy," he announced after a few minutes. "He looks about 3 months old. A bit dehydrated, but otherwise, he seems healthy." Henry let out a sigh of relief he didn't know he was holding. What should I do now, doctor?" The doctor looked at Henry with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Well, the standard procedure would be to call the authorities. They would take care of the child until—" "No," Henry interrupted, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "No, I want to take care of him, at least for now." "Doctor," Matthews frowned. "Henry, taking care of a baby is a big responsibility. Do you have any experience with children?" Henry shook his head, feeling more lost than ever. But something inside him, a voice that had been silent for a long time, urged him to go on. "No, but I need to do this, doctor. I need to try." The doctor studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Very well, I'll teach you the basics tonight. But Henry, you will need help. I suggest you hire an experienced nanny as soon as possible." The next few hours were a whirlwind of information and activities. Matthews taught Henry how to prepare a bottle, change diapers, and hold the baby properly. Each new skill acquired was a small victory, making Henry feel more confident and, surprisingly, more alive than he had in years. When the sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Dr. Matthews was preparing to leave. "Remember, Henry, if you need anything, I'm just a phone call away." Henry nodded, grateful. His eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but there was a new light in them, a purpose that wasn't there before. "Thank you, doctor, for everything." Alone again with the baby, now sleeping peacefully in his arms, Henry allowed himself a moment of reflection. What was he doing? Was he crazy to think he could take care of a child? But then, the baby stirred in his sleep, gripping Henry's finger with his small hand, and all doubts dissipated. "It's okay, Peter," Henry whispered, the name coming naturally to his lips. "I'll take care of you. I promise." With that promise, Henry knew his life would never be the same. The mansion that once seemed so empty and cold was now full of possibilities. He had much to learn, much to change, but for the first time in years, Henry felt hope. The first order of the day would be to hire a nanny. Someone experienced, patient, and above all, kind. Someone who could not only help with Peter, but perhaps, just maybe, bring a little more life to that house. As the sun rose on the horizon, bathing the mansion in a golden light, Henry made another silent promise. This time, not to Peter, but to Robert. "And I won't fail this time, my friend. I'll do the right thing." With Peter safe in his arms and a new day dawning, Henry took the first steps on his journey of redemption. A journey that promised to be challenging, frightening, but above all, transformative. 3 weeks had passed since the rainy night that changed Henry's life forever. The mansion, once silent and cold, was now filled with the sound of baby laughter and the gentle humming of Isabel, the nanny Henry had hired. That morning, Henry watched from the doorway as Isabel rocked Peter to sleep. His heart warmed at the care and affection with which she treated the baby. But the warmth was quickly replaced by a pang of guilt. Who was Peter's mother? Why had she abandoned him? And more importantly, did she want him back? Determined to find answers, Henry retreated to his office. He turned on his computer and began his investigation. First, he checked local birth records from recent months. Nothing. He expanded the search to hospitals and clinics in the area. Still nothing. Frustrated, Henry leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. Then his eyes landed on the worn blanket that had been with Peter when he found him. Perhaps there was a clue there. Carefully examining the fabric, Henry noticed a small, almost faded embroidery in one corner. Just J, S, initials, a name? It was the first real clue he had. With renewed energy, Henry returned to his research. He cross-referenced the initials with records of pregnant women in recent months. A list of possible names appeared on the screen. Julia Scott, Joanne Smith, Josephine Stevens. Henry printed the list and studied it carefully. Something about the name Julia Scott intrigued him. He decided to start with her. In the days that followed, Henry hired private investigators to track down Julia Scott. Information began to arrive, painting a grim picture. Julia, 25, had disappeared about 4 months ago. Her last known residence was a small apartment in the city's suburbs. Neighbors reported hearing frequent arguments and sometimes screams coming from the apartment. Henry's heart tightened as he read the reports. Was Julia fleeing an abusive relationship? Is that why she had left Peter? The investigation also revealed the name of Julia's ex-boyfriend, Mark Johnson, a man with a history of domestic violence and petty crimes. As he absorbed this information, Henry felt a mix of emotions: compassion for Julia, anger at Mark, and a growing desire to protect Peter at all costs. That night, while holding Peter in his arms, Henry made a silent promise. "I will find out the truth, little one, and I will ensure you are safe, no matter what." The baby smiled, oblivious to the worries of the adult world, and Henry felt his heart melt. How was it possible to love someone so much in such a short time? But as his love for Peter grew, so did his fear of losing him. What if Julia came back to claim him? What if Mark found out about Peter? Henry knew he needed to prepare for all possibilities. He called his lawyer and began exploring his legal options. Adoption, temporary custody. Each scenario brought its own complications and uncertainties. At night, after Peter fell asleep, Henry found himself looking at Robert's photo. "What would you do, my friend?" he murmured. "How can I protect this child and do the right thing at the same time?" Silence was his only response, but somehow Henry felt he was on the right path. For the first time in years, his actions were not driven by greed or ambition, but by love and a genuine desire to make a difference. With each passing day, Peter's presence transformed not only the mansion but Henry himself. The cold and calculating man he had become was slowly giving way to someone more compassionate, more human. And while the investigation into Peter's past continued, Henry prepared to face whatever challenges the future might bring. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to fight for something bigger than himself. The sun had barely risen when Henry received the call that would change everything. His investigator, breathless and clearly agitated, spilled a torrent of information that made Henry's blood run cold. "Smith, we found something. Something you need to know immediately about Julia Scott." Henry straightened in his chair, his heart racing. "What is it? Did you find her?" "Not exactly, sir. But we discovered, well, Julia Scott is Robert Smith's sister." The world seemed to stop. Robert Smith, his Robert, his best friend whom he had abandoned, the man whose death haunted him every day. That's not possible," Henry stammered, his mind spinning with the implications. "Robert never mentioned a sister. It seems, sir, they were separated as children. Different adoptions. They only reunited a few years ago." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place in Henry's mind. The last conversations with Robert, his desperation for help, were not just about financial problems. He was trying to protect his newly discovered sister. "There's more, sir," the investigator continued. "Julia was pregnant when she disappeared. The date coincides with Peter's birth," Henry completed, his voice barely above a whisper. Hanging up the phone, Henry stood in a trance, staggering to Peter's room. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the whirlwind of emotions engulfing his guardian. Henry knelt beside the crib, silent tears streaming down his face. Peter was not just an abandoned baby. He was Robert's nephew. His nephew, in a way. The guilt Henry had carried since Robert's death now felt unbearable. Not only had he failed his friend, but also his family. With this innocent child now depending on him, in that moment, Henry made a solemn promise. He would not only care for Peter, but do everything in his power to find Julia and ensure her safety. The days that followed were a mix of frantic determination and deep introspection. Henry doubled his efforts in the search for Julia, while also grappling with his own tumultuous emotions. Every smile from Peter, every small milestone reached, the first roll, the first babble that sounded almost like Dada, was a source of joy and also pain. Henry found himself imagining Robert witnessing these moments, the life his friend should have had. One night, while rocking Peter to sleep, Henry finally allowed himself to truly cry for the first time since Robert's death. He cried for the lost time, the missed opportunities, and the second chance that fate somehow had granted him. "I'm so sorry, Robert," he whispered to the sleeping baby. "I failed you, but I swear I won't fail your nephew. Or your sister." As the days turned into weeks, Henry's determination only grew. He hired more investigators, used his contacts in the business world, made donations to women's shelters across the city, all in the hope of finding some clue about Julia's whereabouts. But with each passing day without news, a new fear began to grow in Henry's heart. What if something had happened to Julia? What if Mark, the abusive ex-boyfriend, had found her? The idea that Peter might be an orphan, truly an orphan, was devastating. But it also brought up questions Henry had been avoiding. If Julia couldn't be found, what would Peter's future be? Henry knew that legally, his position was precarious. He had no real rights over Peter. If the authorities found out, they could take the baby at any moment. It was in this moment of crisis that Henry realized how much Peter had become a part of his life, part of his heart. The thought of losing the boy was unbearable. One night, after putting Peter to sleep, Henry sat in his office, Robert's photo before him. "What should I do, my friend?" he asked the silence. "How can I protect your nephew and honor your memory at the same time?" The answer didn't come in words, but in a sudden clarity of purpose. Henry knew what he needed to do. The next morning, he contacted the best family lawyer in the city. "I want to start the adoption process," he said, his voice firm and resolute. The lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Smith, given the unusual circumstances, this could be complicated. There are ethical and legal issues to consider." "I understand," Henry interrupted. "But I also understand that that child needs a stable home, someone to love and protect him. And I swear I'll do everything I can to be that person." As he began the complex legal process, Henry did not abandon the search for Julia. Every step toward adoption was accompanied by a renewed determination to find Peter's mother. "If she returns," Henry promised himself, "if she wants her child back, I won't hesitate to hand him over. But until then, I'll do everything I can to give Peter the love and security he deserves." As the days passed, Henry found himself transformed not only by Peter's presence in his life, but by the quest for redemption that this presence had triggered. The man who once prioritized profits over people now donated millions to causes of child protection and domestic violence prevention. The executive who rarely left his office now spent hours on the floor, playing with Peter and reading children's stories. And every night, before going to bed, Henry looked at Robert's photo and whispered a renewed promise, "I'll fix this, my friend. For Peter, for Julia, and for you. I promise." The phone rang in the middle of the night, pulling Henry from a restless sleep. His heart raced as he saw the lead investigator's number on the screen. "We found her, Mr. Smith." Julia Scott. Henry felt the air leave his lungs. After months of relentless searching, finally a concrete lead. "Where?" was all he could say. "And in a women's shelter, about 200 miles from here. She's using a false name, but we're sure it's her." Henry looked at the clock, 3:27 a.m. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Prepare the helicopter." As he dressed hastily, Henry stopped by Peter's room. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the emotional storm approaching. Henry gently touched the boy's cheek. "I'll bring your mother back, little one," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. On the flight, Henry tried to organize his tumultuous thoughts. What would he say to Julia? How would he explain the situation with Peter? And more importantly, how would he react if she wanted to take the baby away? Upon arriving at the shelter, a social worker greeted him with a cautious expression. "Mr. Smith, Julia is very fragile. Please, be gentle." Henry nodded, his heart pounding in his chest as he followed the woman down a narrow corridor. The door opened, and there she was, Julia Scott. The same eyes as Robert looked back at him, a mix of fear and defiance in her gaze. "Julia," Henry began, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I'm Henry Smith. I know who you are," Julia interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "You were my brother's friend. The friend who abandoned him when he needed him most." The words hit Henry like a punch to the stomach. He staggered, leaning against the wall. "Julia, you're right. I failed Robert. It's something I live with every day. But I'm here now and I want to help." Julia laughed, a bitter and broken sound. "Help, now, after everything." Henry took a deep breath. It was time for the truth. "Julia, your son, Peter, he's with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Julia paled, her hands gripping the edge of the bed where she sat. How did you—" "He was left at my door a few months ago. I didn't know who his mother was, but I promised to take care of him. When I discovered the connection to Robert—" "Julia, I swear, I've been doing everything to find you." Tears began to fall down Julia's face. "My baby, and is he okay? Is he safe?" Henry felt his own heart break. "He's wonderful, Julia, growing strong and healthy. I brought pictures if you want to see." With trembling hands, he offered his phone to Julia. She took it eagerly, sobbing as she saw the images of her son. "I never wanted to abandon him," she whispered through tears. "But Mark, he found me. Said he would kill the baby if I didn't disappear. I thought leaving him with you was the only way to keep him safe." Henry felt a wave of anger at the mention of Mark's name, followed by deep admiration for Julia's courage. "Julia, I promise, Peter is safe. And now you will be too. I'll make sure Mark never comes near you again." Julia looked at Henry, years of pain and distrust visible in her eyes. "Why do you care so much?" Henry felt the tears he had been holding back finally fall. "Because I failed your brother. Because Peter gave me a second chance to do the right thing. And because you are family, the family I never knew I needed." For a long moment, Julia just watched him, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Then slowly she extended her hand. Henry took it gently, feeling the weight of the trust Julia was placing in him. "I want to see my son," Julia said finally. Henry nodded. "Of course, we can go right now if you want." "But Julia, there's something you need to know." He hesitated, knowing that his next words could change everything. I filed for Peter's adoption." Julia withdrew her hand abruptly, her eyes widening in shock and betrayal. "No!" Henry exclaimed, realizing his mistake. "And it's not what you're thinking. I just wanted to protect him legally while I searched for you. Julia, I swear, if you want your son back, I won't stop you. He's yours." The silence that followed was tense, laden with unspoken emotions. Finally, Julia spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "You really love him, don't you?" Henry felt his heart tighten. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." Julia closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her face. When she opened them again, there was a resolution in her gaze. "I want to see my son. And then we'll decide what's best for him. Together." Henry felt a wave of relief and gratitude flood over him. "Together," he agreed. As they prepared to leave the shelter, Henry knew the road ahead would be complicated. There was much to be resolved, many wounds to be healed. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Hope for redemption, for family, and for a future where the mistakes of the past could finally be corrected. On the way back to the mansion, Julia remained silent, lost in her own thoughts. Henry respected her space, understanding that she needed to process everything that had happened. When they finally arrived, Julia hesitated at the mansion's door. Henry placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. He's waiting for you." Julia nodded, took a deep breath, and entered. The sound of a baby laughing echoed down the hallway, and Julia's eyes filled with tears again. Isabel appeared, carrying Peter. Upon seeing Julia, she stopped, immediately understanding who the woman before her was. Julia," Henry said softly. "This is your son, Peter." With trembling hands, Julia took the baby in her arms. Peter looked at her, curious at first, and then smiled, instinctively recognizing his mother. "Hi, my love," Julia whispered, hugging Peter tightly. "Mommy's here. Mommy will never leave you again." Henry watched the scene, his heart torn between joy at seeing mother and child reunited and a deep fear of losing Peter. But he knew that, regardless of what happened next, he had done the right thing. "Julia," he said softly, "you and Peter can stay here as long as you want. You're safe here." Julia looked at Henry, still cradling Peter. "Thank you," she said, her voice laden with emotion. "And for taking care of him. For finding us." Henry nodded, unable to speak. He knew the coming days would be crucial. There would be much to discuss, difficult decisions to be made. But for now, he allowed himself to savor this moment of peace, of family reunited, knowing that, somehow, Robert would be proud. The days following Julia's return were a mix of joy and tension at Henry's mansion. Julia spent every possible moment with Peter, making up for lost time, while Henry watched from afar, grappling with his own conflicting feelings. One morning, while Julia was rocking Peter on the porch, Henry approached hesitantly. "Julia, we need to talk about everything." She nodded, her eyes never leaving Peter's face. "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound being Julia's soft humming to the baby. "I want you both to stay," Henry finally said. "This mansion is too big for me alone, and here you'll be safe." Julia looked at him, surprised. "Henry, I can't accept this. You've already done so much for us." "Please," Henry insisted. "Think of Peter. Here he'll have everything he needs. And, well, I think we all need each other now." Julia considered his words, her eyes filling with tears. "You're right. But Henry, about the adoption—" "Forget it," Henry interrupted her gently. "You're Peter's mother. I just want to be part of his life if you'll allow it." A small smile appeared on Julia's face. "I think I can allow that." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Henry frowned, not expecting visitors. He got up to answer, but Isabel was already at the door. "Mr. Smith," she called, her voice tense, "I think you should come here." Henry hurried to the door, Julia right behind him, still holding Peter. At the entrance stood a rough-looking man, his eyes scanning the scene before him with a dangerous gleam. "Mark," Julia whispered, her face losing all color. Henry immediately positioned himself between Julia and the newcomer. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cold. Mark smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to see my family." "Julia, darling, why don't you come here with our son?" Julia backed away, clutching Peter to her chest. Henry felt a wave of anger surge through him. "I think you should leave now," he said, his voice low and threatening. Mark laughed. "Or what, rich boy, gonna call your security? This is my family and I'm taking them home." "They're not going anywhere with you," Henry replied, his stance firm. The tension was palpable. Mark took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Oh, you don't know who you're messing with, man." At that moment, the sound of sirens cut through the air. 2 police cars pulled up in front of the mansion, and 4 officers quickly got out. Mark cursed, backing away. "This isn't over," he threatened before turning and running. The officers pursued him, but Henry barely noticed. He turned to Julia, who was shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, it's okay now," he said softly, guiding her back inside. "You're safe here." Later, after calming Julia and putting Peter to sleep, Henry met with the head of his security team. "I want the security tightened immediately," he ordered. "Additional cameras, guards 24 hours. No one enters or leaves without my express authorization." The head of security nodded. "Yes, sir. And about Mr. Mark?" Henry clenched his fists. "Find out everything you can about him. I want to know his every move." That night, as the mansion quieted down, Henry couldn't sleep. The threat of Mark loomed over them like a dark cloud. He knew the man wouldn't give up easily. Standing at the door of Peter's room, watching Julia asleep in the rocking chair beside the crib, Henry made a silent promise. He would protect this family, his family, no matter the cost. The following days were tense. Julia rarely left Peter's room, always vigilant. Henry divided his time between working in his home office and obsessively checking the mansion's security. One night, while everyone was having dinner together, a rare occurrence in recent days, Henry's phone rang. It was his private investigator. "Mr. Smith, we have information on Mark. He has an extensive criminal record. Assault, theft, and there are suspicions of involvement with a human trafficking ring." Henry felt his blood run cold. The situation was even worse than he had imagined. "Oh, thank you," he said on the phone. "Keep investigating. I want to know every detail." Hanging up, Henry noticed Julia watching him, her eyes filled with fear. He forced a smile, trying to appear calm. "It's okay," he said. "We're taking care of everything." But as the words left his mouth, Henry knew things were far from okay. The battle to protect Julia and Peter was just beginning, and he feared things would get worse before they got better. As the weeks passed, the initial tension in the mansion began to give way to a comfortable routine. Henry, Julia, and Peter slowly adjusted to their new family dynamic, though the threat of Mark still loomed over them like a distant shadow. One sunny morning, Henry found Julia in the kitchen, preparing breakfast while Peter played in his playpen nearby. Good morning," Henry said, hesitant. Can I help with anything?" Julia smiled, a gesture that was becoming more frequent. Sure, can you cut some fruit for me? As they worked side by side, a comfortable silence settled between them. Henry glanced at Julia, noticing how she seemed more relaxed, more at peace. Julia, he began. I was thinking, maybe we could go for a walk today. There's a park nearby, very safe. Peter would love the fresh air. Julia paused what she was doing, considering the proposal. I don't know, Henry. What if... We have security. Henry interrupted her gently. And I'll be there. I promise you'll be safe. After a moment of hesitation, Julia nodded. Okay, let's try. The walk in the park was a success. Peter laughed and cooed at the sight of the trees and felt the breeze on his face. Julia, initially tense, began to relax, even laughing when a curious squirrel approached them. Henry watched the scene with a mix of joy and nostalgia. This was how a family should be, he thought. Happy, united, free of worries. Back at the mansion, while Julia put Peter to sleep, Henry retreated to his office. His eyes landed on Robert's photo, as they always did in moments of reflection. Am I doing the right thing, my friend? He murmured. They deserve a normal life, free of fear. As if in response, Henry heard a soft knock on the door. It was Julia. Can I come in? She asked. Of course, Henry replied, indicating a chair. Julia sat down, her eyes wandering around the room until they landed on Robert's photo. You miss him, don't you? Henry nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Every day. He talked about you a lot, you know, Julia said softly. Even in the end. Henry felt his heart tighten. Julia, I'm so sorry. If I had listened, if I had helped... No, Julia interrupted, reaching out to touch his hand. We can't live in the past, Henry. Robert wouldn't want that. What matters is what we do now. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something changed between them. A mutual understanding, a silent forgiveness. The days that followed brought a new lightness to the mansion. Henry began spending more time with Peter, reading stories and playing on the living room floor. Julia, in turn, began to open up more, sharing stories of her childhood and her brief years with Robert. One night, while the three were having dinner together, Peter looked at Henry and clearly said, Papa. The silence that followed was deafening. Henry looked at Julia, shocked and a little scared. But to his surprise, Julia was smiling, tears in her eyes. I think he chose for us, she said softly. That night, after putting Peter to sleep, Henry and Julia sat on the porch looking at the stars. Julia, Henry began, hesitant, about what happened at dinner. It's okay, Henry, Julia interrupted him. Actually, I wanted to talk about it. About us, about the future. Henry felt his heart race. What do you mean? Julia took a deep breath. You've been amazing, Henry, with Peter, with me. You've given us a home, security. But more than that, you've given us a family. She paused, gathering courage. I know we started in a complicated way, but I think we're building something here. Something good. Henry felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Julia, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Julia smiled. Let's keep building this day by day for Peter. For us. In that moment, looking at Julia under the starlight, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope for a bright future, for a family, for redemption. The days that followed were filled with small moments of happiness. Picnics in the garden, movie nights with Peter nestled between them, long conversations after the baby fell asleep. Henry watched in awe as Peter grew, each new milestone a celebration. His first step, his first full word, his first scribbled drawing. Julia, in turn, began to blossom. She resumed her online studies, determined to build a future for herself and Peter. Henry supported her every step of the way, proud of her strength and resilience. One afternoon, while playing with Peter in the garden, Henry found himself thinking about how much his life had changed. The mansion, once cold and empty, was now filled with laughter and love. He, who once only cared about business and profits, now found his greatest joy in a baby's smiles and Julia's gentle affection. That night, after putting Peter to sleep, Henry found Julia in the library. She was flipping through a photo album, silent tears streaming down her face. Julia, Henry called softly. Is everything okay? She looked at him, a sad smile on her lips. These are photos of Robert. I just wish he could see Peter, see how we are now. Henry sat beside her, placing a comforting arm around her. He would see that his sacrifice was not in vain, that his sister and nephew are safe and loved. Julia leaned against him, finding comfort in his presence. "Thank you, Henry, for everything." As he held Julia, Henry felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. They still had a long way to go, and the threat of Mark still loomed on the horizon. But in that moment, he knew that together, they could face anything. The family that fate had brought together in such an unlikely way was becoming stronger every day, and Henry was determined to protect it, no matter the cost. The peace that had settled over the mansion was abruptly interrupted on a Wednesday morning. Henry was in his office when his head of security entered, his face tense. "Smith, we have a problem," he said, handing an envelope to Henry. Inside were photos, Julia and Peter in the park, Henry carrying the baby to the car, the three of them dining at a restaurant, all taken from a distance, clearly without their knowledge. Henry felt his blood run cold. "Mark," the head of security nodded. "We believe so. Has been more careful, but our sources confirm he's in town." Henry stood up abruptly. "Increase security. No one enters or leaves without being checked. And Julia and Peter don't leave the property until further notice." After the guard left, Henry stood staring out the window. The happiness of the past weeks now seemed like a distant dream. "Henry!" Julia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was at the door, Peter in her arms. "Was everything okay?" He turned, forcing a smile. "Sure. Just work." But Julia knew him too well now. "What's going on?" Henry hesitated. He wanted to protect her, not scare her, but he also knew she deserved the truth. "Mark," he said finally. "He's in town, and he's been watching us." Julia's face paled. She clutched Peter to her chest, as if she could protect him with the strength of her embrace alone. "And what are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Henry approached, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I will keep you safe. I promise." In the days that followed, the mansion turned into a fortress. Additional guards were hired. Security cameras installed in every corner of the property. Henry worked tirelessly, dividing his time between managing his business and coordinating the family's security. Julia, in turn, tried to maintain an appearance of normalcy for Peter. She continued with her daily routines, reading stories, playing in the garden, always under the watchful eyes of the guards. One night, after putting Peter to sleep, Julia found Henry in his office, hunched over piles of paperwork. "You need to rest," she said softly. Henry looked at her, his eyes tired. "I can't. Not until I'm sure you're safe." Julia approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We are safe. Thanks to you." Henry covered her hand with his, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I couldn't bear if anything happened to you," he admitted. Julia knelt beside him, forcing him to look into her eyes. "Nothing will happen. We're in this together, remember?" In that moment, looking into Julia's eyes, Henry realized something he might have known for some time. He loved her. Loved her not just as Peter's mother or Robert's sister, but as the strong and compassionate woman she was. Before he could say anything, however, a shrill alarm cut through the air. "The security system." Henry jumped to his feet, pulling Julia with him. "Stay here," he ordered, running out of the office. In the hallway, he met his head of security. "What's happening?" "Attempted breach on the south perimeter, sir." The guards intercepted. Henry felt his heart race. "Mark? We're not sure yet, but it's likely." Henry ran his hands through his hair, tension evident in every line of his face. "Reinforced security. I want reports every hour." Returning to the office, he found Julia holding Peter, who had woken up from the noise. "It's okay," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "It was just a false alarm." Julia nodded, but Henry could see the fear in her eyes. He approached, enveloping them both in a protective embrace. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised, his voice low and intense. Never. That night, no one slept in the mansion. Henry spent hours in meetings with his security team, planning, preparing for every possible scenario. Julia, unable to return to her room, stayed in the living room with Peter, her eyes fixed on the windows as if she could keep danger at bay with her vigilance alone. When the sun finally rose, bathing the mansion in its golden light, Henry joined them in the living room. He looked exhausted but determined. "And we need to talk," he said, sitting beside Julia. She nodded, adjusting Peter in her lap. And what's really going on, Henry? Henry took a deep breath. Mark is getting closer. Last night's breach was just the beginning. He won't give up easily. Julia closed her eyes, holding Peter tightly. What can we do? I have a plan, Henry said, his voice firm. But it will require us to trust each other completely. Can we do that? Julia looked at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. Slowly, she nodded. Yes, we can. Henry took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Then we'll fight together. As the day dawned, bringing with it the promise of new challenges, Henry, Julia, and Peter remained united. The storm was coming, but they were ready to face it. Together, as a family. The tension in the mansion reached its peak on the third night after the attempted breach. Henry was in his office, reviewing the security reports for the 100th time when the alarm sounded again. This time, there was no doubt. Mark had penetrated the outer defenses. "Oh, Julia!" Henry shouted, running through the corridors. "Grab Peter and go to the panic room." He found Julia in Peter's room, already holding the baby. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was a fierce determination on her face. "Go," Henry said, guiding them to the secret corridor leading to the panic room. "Stay there until I come for you. No matter what you hear, don't come out." Julia hesitated for a moment, then turned and kissed Henry quickly. "Be careful," she whispered before disappearing down the corridor with Peter. Henry barely had time to process what had happened when he heard the sound of breaking glass downstairs. He rushed to the main hall, where he found his security guards in a physical struggle with Mark and two other men. "Where's my son?" Mark shouted when he saw Henry. "He's not your son," Henry replied, his voice cold as steel. "And you'll never get near him again." Mark laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "But you think you can stop me? I'm his father." "Father?" Henry felt the anger rise within him. "A father protects, loves, cares." He only brought fear and pain to Julia and Peter. Mark's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare talk about them as if they're yours. They're my family." "Family?" Henry took a step forward, ignoring the guards' warnings. "You don't know the meaning of that word? Family is what we've built here. It's love, trust, protection, things you never gave them." For a moment, something like doubt crossed Mark's face, but it was quickly replaced by fury. With a roar of anger, he lunged at Henry. The two men fell to the ground, exchanging blows. Henry, despite his lack of experience in fights, was driven by a strength he didn't know he possessed. The strength of love for Julia and Peter, the determination to protect his family at all costs. Around them, the guards fought with Mark's accomplices. The sound of the struggle echoed through the mansion, mixed with the alarm still blaring. In a moment of distraction, Mark managed to break free and ran toward the stairs. Henry, his heart in his throat, realized he was heading toward Peter's room. No!" Henry shouted, chasing after him. In the second-floor hallway, Henry caught up with Mark, tackling him. The two rolled across the floor, each struggling to gain the upper hand. "You don't understand," Mark panted between blows. "I need them. They're all I have." "Then why did you hurt them?" Henry retorted, blocking a punch. "Why did you make them live in fear?" For a moment, Mark seemed to truly consider the question. His hesitation gave Henry the opening he needed. With a quick move, he pinned Mark to the ground. "It's over," Henry said, panting. "You've lost." At that moment, the police burst through the front door. Henry heard the officers' shouts, the sound of people being detained. As the police handcuffed Mark, Henry stood up with difficulty. His body ached, and he could taste blood in his mouth. But none of that mattered. There was only one thought in his mind: Julia and Peter. He ran to the panic room, entering the code with trembling fingers. The door opened, revealing Julia holding Peter, silent tears streaming down her face. "It's over," Henry said softly. "You're safe now." Julia let out a sob of relief and ran into Henry's arms, Peter between them. For a long moment, they stood like that, embraced, feeling each other's warmth and safety. Later, after the police had left with Mark and his accomplices, and the mansion was quiet again, Henry, Julia, and Peter sat in the living room. Peter, exhausted from the excitement, slept peacefully in Julia's lap. "I thought," Julia began, her voice trembling. "When I heard the gunshots, I thought—" "Shh," Henry soothed her, taking her hand. "We're all here." Julia looked at him, her eyes full of emotion. "You saved us. You risked your life for us. Henry smiled gently. "Oh, you're my family now. I'd do anything for you." Julia leaned in, resting her head on Henry's shoulder. "We'd do anything for you too." As the night wore on, the three remained like that, united. The storm had passed, and although there was still much to be resolved, much to be healed, they knew they would face it all together. The next morning, Henry woke up to the sound of Peter laughing. He found Julia and the baby in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The domestic scene hit him with full force. This was what he had always wanted, without ever knowing. "Good morning," Julia smiled, handing him a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling?" Henry winced at the aches from the previous night's fight. "I like I've been hit by a truck. But," he added, picking up Peter, "I've never been better." As they had breakfast, they discussed the next steps. There was much to be done. Statements to the police, legal measures against Mark, therapy for Julia. "And what about us?" Julia asked softly, her eyes meeting Henry's. Henry took her hand across the table. "What do you want us to be?" Julia smiled, tears in her eyes. "A family, for real." Henry felt his heart expand. "Nothing would make me happier." That afternoon, while Peter took his nap, Henry and Julia sat in the garden. The sun shone. The flowers were in full bloom, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear or anxiety in the air. "You know," Henry said, looking at Julia, "when I found Peter that rainy night, I never imagined my life would change so much." Julia squeezed his hand. "You saved us, Henry. Not just from Mark, but from a life of fear and loneliness." Henry shook his head. "No, Julia, you saved me. You gave me a purpose, a family. You taught me what really matters in life." As the sun set, casting golden hues over the garden, Henry and Julia remained there, hands intertwined, hearts united. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together as a family. Dawn brought with it a sense of renewal to the mansion. Henry woke up with the first rays of sun entering through the window. A feeling of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time filling his chest. Beside him, Julia slept peacefully, her face serene for the first time in months. Quietly, Henry got up and went to Peter's room. The baby was already awake, smiling at his adoptive father. "Good morning, champ," Henry whispered, picking Peter up. "How about we take a walk in the garden?" The days that followed were of adjustment and healing. Julia began therapy to deal with the trauma of the abusive relationship and the separation from Peter. Henry, in turn, immersed himself in the official adoption process for Peter, determined to ensure the child was never threatened again. One afternoon, while watching Peter play in the garden, Julia turned to Henry with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Henry took her hand, intertwining their fingers. There's nothing to thank. You two have given me much more than I could ever repay." As the weeks passed, life at the mansion took on a new normalcy. Mornings were filled with laughter during family breakfasts. Afternoons saw Henry working in his office, often with Peter playing at his feet, while Julia resumed her online studies. Nights were for family moments, shared dinners, bedtime stories, and whispered conversations between Henry and Julia after Peter fell asleep. It was during one of these nighttime conversations that Julia expressed a desire that had been growing in her heart. "Henry," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about Robert." Henry felt his heart tighten at the mention of his late friend. What about him?" I think he'd like to know we're together, that we're taking care of each other and Peter." Julia paused, gathering courage. "I'd like to visit his grave." Together. Henry felt a lump in his throat. The guilt over Robert's death still weighed on him, but the idea of facing it with Julia by his side brought a sense of comfort. "I'd love that," he responded softly. The next day, with Peter in their arms, Henry and Julia made the journey to the cemetery. In front of Robert's headstone, they stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice choked with emotion. "Robert, my friend, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me. But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life taking care of your family. Our family." Julia, with tears in her eyes, added, "Brother, I miss you every day. But I want you to know we're okay. We're happy. And your nephew, he's wonderful. He's going to grow up knowing how amazing his uncle was." As they left the cemetery, Henry felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The guilt was still there, but now it was accompanied by a sense of purpose and redemption. Back at the mansion, while putting Peter to sleep, Henry turned to Julia. "Marry me," he said softly, the words coming out before he could think twice. Julia looked at him, surprised before a smile lit up her face. "Yes," she simply replied, pulling him into a kiss. The following months were a whirlwind of wedding preparations and finalizing the adoption process. The mansion, once cold and lonely, was now full of life and love. On the wedding day, the mansion's garden was decorated with white and gold flowers. Peter, now almost 2 years old, toddled down the aisle as the ring bearer, eliciting smiles and sighs from the guests. When Julia walked down the aisle, Henry felt his heart almost stop. She was radiant, her eyes shining with love and happiness. 2 years ago, Henry began his vows. "I was a lost man, living an empty life. Then on a rainy night, fate placed Peter at my door. And through him, I found you, Julia. You two taught me the true meaning of family, of unconditional love. I promised to spend every day of my life repaying that love, protecting our family, and being the best husband and father I can be." Julia, with tears in her eyes, responded, "Henry, you saved us in every possible way. You gave us a home, security, and above all, love. I promise to stand by your side through every moment, good and bad. Together, we'll create the family we always dreamed of having." As they exchanged rings and sealed their union with a kiss, Henry felt a presence. Looking up at the sky, he could swear he saw Robert smiling, blessing their union. That night, with the party in full swing, Henry found a moment of quiet, watching Julia dance with Peter in her arms. He felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Somehow, through tragedy and loss, he had found the greatest treasure of all, a family. And as the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Henry knew this was not an end, but a beautiful beginning. The beginning of a life full of love, laughter, and above all, family. The story of Henry, Julia, and Peter reminds us that life can surprise us in unexpected ways. Sometimes, it's in the darkest moments that we find the light that transforms our existence. Just as Henry opened his heart to a new family, we invite you to open your heart to more stories like this. If this journey of redemption, love, and second chances touched your soul, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Subscribe to our channel to receive more narratives that inspire and move. Padim Sekam Siowar. Leave your like as a symbol of the love that Henry, Julia, and Peter built together. And in the comments, share with us, what was the moment in the story that resonated most with you? Remember, every story shared is an opportunity to touch another life, just as little Peter touched Henry's heart on that rainy night. Together we can spread more love, understanding, and hope throughout the world. So what are you waiting for? Join our family of storytellers and listeners. Because in the end, we are all part of a great narrative called life.